Always recommend running an up-to-date version of Google Chrome when using Blackboard and Blackboard Collaborate Ultra.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Training Talks. Rob Boulay here with Chris Bird, and we're using a fancy new piece of technology today, so we're going to experiment with that, and I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks for joining us, everybody. I wanted to start off by just touching on the fact that most of the folks we've spoken to in our training talks up to this point have brought us a more instructor side perspective to the changes that they faced with online learning, or moving to an online learning world from a face-to-face. But today's guest, I'd like to welcome Lindsey Voisin. She's here to provide us with a more of a student perspective, maybe on how this change has affected students who didn't anticipate being online this fall that where we currently are. So thank you, Lindsey, for joining us. We appreciate your time today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
The first question we wanted to ask you, first of all, tell us a little bit about your role at Nipissing and how that might have changed, or what changes you're seeing in your role as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, no, so I'm the student learning coordinator for writing and academic skills. I work from a student development, so student services perspective with students. And in my role, I'm working with them on developing those fundamental academic skills that they may need in order to meet their definition of success. So looking at it from a writing, general literacy, through study strategies and other those foundational skills. In terms of how the pandemic has changed my role, in many ways it hasn't. For a long time, I had a more home background than this. But in my role, I've been supporting distance learners for years through our committed online programs. The big shift was the volume in number of students we were supporting from a distance perspective, and adding to that complement of students, we were seeing, as you said, those students who didn't anticipate being online learners. They hadn't sort of signed up for this journey for themselves. So I guess in addition to working with students on those foundational skills, we've had to adapt to how do we learn those foundational skills in an unanticipated online world.
That's interesting. It's yeah, in terms of the student perspective of everything that's going on, it's not often you think about them having to access these services, and especially ones who weren't expecting to have to move online this semester. It's certainly something additional that they may never have had to access your services before now, but because of what's going on, it's become more important than ever. So it's good that people like you are here, and certainly we appreciate the help you provide to students, so as much as they do. Can you tell us a little bit about what other services are offered in the Office of Student Learning and Transitions?
Yeah, we have, so there's myself, and then there's me on the math and science side of the house. So Veronica works with students in a very similar capacity, but even there, she's finding, there's unique challenges that have come about through math and science courses in particular, like students just having to learn how to use, this is where I'll show my gaps in knowledge, but like statistical symbols, they can't write them out. They have to find out how to do it in an online world. Like how do I manipulate my keyboard in order to do that? I heard this somewhere recently, and someone mentioned, there's a lot of barriers between one's brain and the keyboard. So that's what we're kind of seeing, and what those things that we didn't necessarily think about. We have support for our first year learners as well. So the first year experience comes out of our office, and then we have unique supports for mature and transfer students as well. And those learners have been a really interesting cohort to work with because they may be coming at it from a totally different level of comfort with technology. That comes with its own unique set of challenges. And we have career services coming out of our department too. We are small but mighty.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, I think some of the big things that I wanted to kind of get out there, we have been noticing is the those barriers and the misconceptions that students have had about online learning leading up to this point. So if they haven't taken an online course, if they anticipated being a distance or a on-campus learner, they kind of have an idea of what the structure of their day may look like. So they know that they go to class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday or whatever, and they manage their time beyond that. Within an online world, what we're seeing is that the students, again, the ones who didn't anticipate this, they're unaccustomed to structuring their day and how many hours it takes to go through their weekly material, but also staying on top of future assignments and reviewing past notes. This is all kind of something that they've had to come up with on their own in many cases. And that's where we're seeing the manifestation of stress and anxiety and all of these negative task associations that they're getting. So we're seeing an uptick in procrastination behaviors because they're like, this feels gross, I don't want to do this, and avoiding their work as a result. So from a faculty perspective, we may be hearing that students aren't logging into their courses because they're just avoiding that negative feeling full stop. So they're completely withdrawing and disengaging from the material. So that's within my role and within my department. That's what we're seeing more and more. Students are identifying as wanting help with time management, but it's this avoidance of an understandably negative experience that they're kind of manifesting in their academics. So that was more about what I kind of wanted to talk about.
It's almost like a snowball effect of what's happening, right?
Mhm.
The force to move online is creating anxieties over things that they might have never considered before, and things that they maybe didn't, issues they didn't have in an on-site setting because like you said, their day is more scheduled and they kind of know how their day is going to go when you're on an on-site setting. Whereas online, you
Mhm.
do have the leisure to do it on your own time, but sometimes it's about
Yeah.
making that time and working that into your schedule when it's not sort of forced like it is in an on-site setting. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. There's almost to a degree. I mean, there's always a transition from high school to a university or post-secondary learning experience. They do have to manage their time more than they did in high school. But an on-campus learner will have some of their time managed.
Mhm.
There are these checkpoints where they have that degree of accountability, regardless of the size of the class. They feel like, okay, this is somewhere that I need to be. And that doesn't necessarily exist in an asynchronous learning world. Certainly those classes where they do have that synchronous element, it's been a bit better, but then you're still adding on screen fatigue um, in those situations. So while it's super positive that they have that guided time, it's still a hard thing for them to. It's a hard thing for me to sit still. I've been bopping around this whole time, so
I do the same.
it's hard. It's hard for them to sit still for that full hour and a half or whatever it may be for that live session and get the same information out of it.
Mhm.
So yeah, it has definitely been an interesting learning curve from a support side because at the same time as the students are experiencing it, we're almost where I feel more comfortable being proactive when I'm supporting students. I kind of have to be reactive and responsive to the things that they're bringing to the table and find out how to support that in real time, which has been a unique working experience. But I'm sure on the student side, it's also a frustrating path to navigate.
Are there any direct tips that you could maybe give to our faculty who are watching that you're hearing from students, like what they would like to see that might help them with their time management?
I think if I'm just writing myself a note about what I want to say now. I think one thing that's what I'm hearing from students is they don't have a understanding of how long things should take. So those even like general benchmarks, like this reading may take you 2 hours, so that they have a realistic understanding of what they can expect. This video lecture is an hour and a half. It's even something as simple as that, even though as soon as a student clicks on it, they should be able to see how long it is. Because some of them, when they're working on top of all of the other things, being able to inventory the number of hours they need to commit to something is really, really helpful. And something that I can't necessarily provide them with. And I think most students are very understanding about this is a general guideline. It's not as though, putting out that signpost for them is like, this will take you 2 hours. You should, feel bad if it takes you more or whatever. It's just giving them an idea of how they could be spending their time and the things that they could be doing. Also, maybe even giving them an idea of how they can break down an assignment. I work with students on that frequently, but I don't see all the students. Based on our statistics, we're seeing about 10 to 12% of students. So there's a huge number of students who are not getting any support with this. So having the students that I'm seeing that are having a lot of successes are the ones where the assignments are kind of naturally broken down and they have frequent check-ins. So for students where this isn't their choice per se, normally they would be going to class and they'd be overhearing people saying, oh yeah, I finished my outline for my essay that's due in a few weeks, or XYZ. They have these little social prompts and they don't necessarily have that in the online world. So having assignments that are a bit more naturally broken down with multiple checkpoints would probably also be beneficial.
Very nice, thanks. Yeah, I think those would be really helpful. I think even as like outside of COVID times where we're,
Yeah,
students are participating in trying to balance all that time. Like I know that was a big barrier when I was taking school. So yeah,
totally.
amazing.
I'm an online learner myself. Like I'm taking online courses right now, and I'm a full-time employee and I do other things. Balancing all of it is hard, and this is actually my job. Like I should be able to practice what I preach, but it's hard when you're doing it in real time. The other thing that I wrote down here, a lot of students, when it comes to discussion posts in particular, those contributions to that asynchronous learning environment, it's in writing quite often. And for many students, whether they be first language speakers or uh, students for whom English is an additional language, or students with learning disabilities, any number of things, writing can be such a huge point of vulnerability for many learners. And certainly that is part of the academic experience, and at least within the educational construct that we find ourselves in, writing is a huge part of it. But certainly giving them other ways to participate in those discussions, I think would also alleviate a lot of the concerns. I'm meeting with students who are working on discussion posts for upwards of 7 hours a week. Like one discussion post takes them 7 hours to complete. And this is a 200-word contribution. They're putting an enormous amount of pressure on themselves because they don't want to appear misinformed or appear intellectually inferior or anything like that. They're very vulnerable when it comes to their writing. So whether it be an opportunity to maybe record their thoughts or submit it in a different way, because especially if a student might have had that opportunity to have a discussion in a in-person classroom context, they don't have that. It's all in something that really puts them in a space of discomfort, which I don't disagree with. I think putting yourself into a little bit of discomfort every once in a while is a good thing. Zone of proximal development, it's great. But I'm seeing it on the other end to extremes where there could be alternatives.
Just the other day, I was having a conversation with a social work professor who's doing that sort of thing, where they're allowing students, here's kind of what I'd like you to answer, provide it to me however works best for you, whether that's an image or if it's a video or a meme or a poetry, whatever you feel is the way you'd like to express the response to this, go ahead and do that.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Like that's that.
Yeah, and in that it's a direct relation to that they're not having that engagement.
Yeah, discussion posts, they have their space, and I would say that don't necessarily got rid of them by any means. It's still quite useful, but there are other ways that they can express themselves that might actually yield better results and more meaningful conversation amongst the students if they're actually able to tap into their strengths. As like for me, I would just do my thing and I would get my thoughts out there, but I don't. That's my strength. If I were asked to contribute poetry, probably not so much. But that's my strength. Or a video, like probably not. But giving people that choice, I love that. That's, and you know what, there's probably a good reason that I haven't seen students from that class.
Could be.
It's so yeah, those were kind of I guess I have really been, and I have it written on my wall, like not on my wall, like on a piece of paper.
It's okay, facilities, no need to rush in there.
Sorry. I have it written, like there's a lot of barriers between the brain and the keyboard that aren't necessarily present when someone can speak or present in another way, and we're kind of forcing people to overcome a lot of barriers that they didn't think they were going to have to trip over because of something that's beyond their control. So,
and now that you mention it, you bring it up in this conversation, I'm thinking about all those barriers too. Like if I was to be a student and go through that process, I know what I'm like when I post a social media post. I'm like,
right?
Really like, I need to make sure that my messaging is right, that my grammar is okay, that my spelling is right. Like I'm using like words that I think are appropriate to the people who are going to, I can only imagine as a student and having that pressure.
Totally.
The only communication format. That's pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're overthinking everything. And then for many students, then they're just waiting for, and I can't think of any scenarios where it would actually happen. But when we add that layer of anonymity to the student experience as well, then they're worried, okay, someone's going to come at me for this, or like someone's going to point out that I misused a word, or I'm going to be revealed for not having read this page as thoroughly as I should have, or whatever. There's and I can't say that actually comes to fruition. It's just like there's a fear.
Yeah.
They live in a social media world. They live in a world of the online discussion boards on newspapers. Mm-hmm. Like there's always that fear that something bad can happen. So I think that's more and more present.
Chris just did a video recently about one of the new the avatar features that we turned on, right?
Oh, fun! I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so students can upload, or students, faculty, staff, any of our users in Blackboard can upload an avatar image. Mm-hmm. Whether it's you personally or if it's something that represents you, like that's what you can upload, so that beside your discussion posts and any of your interactions in the learning environment, you have that image. So
Yeah.
you make that personal connection. It's no longer that anonymous.
No, that's great. Yeah. Like encouraging people to represent themselves through that, I'm sure is super helpful. At
Certainly
least,
can help. It certainly can help relieve some of that feeling of only an individual or a number in this course. There's actually a face
Yeah.
behind the student number, student name, user ID, and it creates some familiarity. Especially, I had a professor actually just yesterday ask me, how common is it for someone to upload a picture of themselves as the instructor in the course? And I said, well, not as common as I'd like to see. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Some folks put it in their syllabi, so that when the students go through the syllabus for the very first time, they get to see, hey, this is my professor. They're actually a real human being, not just someone behind a computer screen, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes that can get lost in this translation too, in terms of the move to online, and it helps the students still have somewhat of an experience in terms of a classroom setting, right? They still get the chance to see who's who in their class and put a face to a name, whereas sometimes it's just a name to a number, I guess, in different ways. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great point, like adding that human element, and that's where in my work with students, it comes from a perspective of approaching the student as a whole person. So that is a whole person that's bringing, potentially children, potentially, stress over finances. They're bringing all of these other elements to the table. So having a space where they can actually be valued for their whole self. And I think that's what Nipissing University also prides itself on, is looking at each student as being unique and supporting them through it. So that's kind of, and it's kind of been lost for everyone in a COVID world. There is no real individuality in that. But I think bringing that back as much as possible and acknowledging that, it has to be diversified for the students, and we need to look at that quite seriously, I think would go a long way.
For sure. I don't really have any other questions at this point. I think we've managed to cover a lot of stuff without even having to ask questions, which is great. I appreciate that about you, Lindsey. Did you have anything else, Rob?
No, I was just going to say, I think that covers a lot of ground that, faculty and even ourselves, we've gotten caught in that workflow.
Yeah.
Just, jumping everything to online. And now we have that opportunity to kind of step back a little bit and say, before winter, okay, what did we forget about, right?
Yeah.
Like the things that we missed. And I think you bring up a lot of really great points there.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to ask me any questions about the student experience and or true crime.
Nice.
I have thoughts on all.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Always recommend running an up-to-date version of Google Chrome when using Blackboard and Blackboard Collaborate Ultra.